Hi, everybody. My name is Marty Yelsky, and I have the honor to be the chair of the Akron Summit Genocide and Holocaust program, which we have, as well as the council. In light of everything that's been going on the last few weeks, but going back over a series of years, there's been a dramatic increase, as you know, of anti-Semitism. It starts with isolated incidents. It starts with isolated actions, isolated words, more acceptance of those words, more acceptance of those incidents. And what started out as just dislike becomes hatred. And as the theme becomes, it then becomes violence. If anybody has listened or watched the last few weeks to see what's been going on in Israel, you see that the people's comments are really focused on this absolute hate and this absolute denigration of people who are different. Of course, those are the early steps that we saw from history of what happens with the Holocaust. So it's important that we remember what happened from years back. Remember and make sure it doesn't happen again. The City of Akron Holocaust commemoration first took place in the spring of 1986. It was unusual for a city to sponsor a commemoration to increase awareness of the Holocaust, especially in light of all the things happening at the time. But believing in the importance of learning the lessons from the Holocaust in our schools, the City of Akron introduced the Arts and Writing Contest 2 years later, directed at Holocaust education in the middle and high schools in Akron, and then increasing in the rest of Summit County. The Akron Summit Council on Holocaust and Genocide Education is now a separate entity operating within the Jewish Federation called Jewish Akron, and with the financial and technical help of Summit County under County Executive Eileen Shapiro, the financial help of the City of Akron under Mayor Darren Horgan, the involvement of the Akron Summit Library, who will provide space and encouragement for our program, and more recently, with a special grant from the Ohio Holocaust and Genocide Memorial and Education Commission, and the financial support from people in the community. Our primary purpose and project is to sponsor the annual Arts and Writing Contest. More about that after the program. And we do this in an important way to have younger people understand and face the issues that occurred and led to the Holocaust. You will hear later from our board member, Renee Pensky, after our keynote speakers, about that in more details. We also host the annual education seminar, which we're about to begin, relating to the theme of the contest this year. Last year, we celebrated our 35th anniversary. Our hope is to silence the echoes of the Holocaust and genocides that are reverberating through conflicts that continue to plague us, as we just noticed in the last few weeks. This year's theme is Lessons of the Holocaust, and as I said, how hatred turns to violence. Let me introduce our two participants, speakers, involving people, and it'll be time for questions after they talk about their presentations and their history and background. We had the pleasure to meet them at the Maltz Museum, which they made a presentation to us about their background and history before we got a tour of everything went on in Maltz. Adrienne Yelsky, I like the Yelsky, it's close to Belsky, so that's not bad, was a child immigrant in this country, spending her birth year in Romania, then illegally escaping to Hungary, and at age 9, crossing the icy snow-covered fields of communist Hungary into Austria, a 4 kilometers silent hike. Her 10th birthday was celebrated in a displaced persons camp outside of Vienna, and 8 months later, the official visa was granted to her parents and her to emigrate to Montreal, Canada, where she had some distant family. After a year, they entered the United States as legal residents, and the rest, as they say, is history. Adrienne taught social studies at Cleveland Heights High School until her retirement in 2012. So these are two very special memorable events from this year's teaching. First is that she taught an elective class called Lessons of the Holocaust for 8 years. And second, that she was Travis Kelsey's American history teacher. Wow, that's impressive. Okay, let me just watch that. Okay, along the way, she and her husband of 55 years, Lanny, raise your hand.
That's me.
Continue to live in their starter home,
Yeah.
of 50 happy years in the starter home, having raised 2 wonderful children, along with welcoming 16 incredible AFS exchange students, quote, sons, unquote, to live with them for a year at a time. In retirement, she relishes time with her 3 granddaughters, works at John Carroll University as university supervisor, overseeing the progress of student teachers at area high schools, and volunteers, that's how we met her, at the Maltz Museum as a docent working predominantly with high school schools. Mary Ann Brennan, mother, grandmother, educator. 42-year educational career working with children, parents, administration, staff, and the community. She began as an elementary school teacher and continued her career as a school guidance counselor. During the time, her work included students from preschool all the way up through high school. The little ones were so eager to learn and participate. The middle students were fascinating and intriguing mix of childish and adult thoughts and behaviors. You all remember what middle students are like. Fascinating from moment to moment. The continuing maturity of the senior high school students provided a plethora of challenges and rewards. It was a blessing, she says, to share all of their ventures. She learned a lot. She was and still is a member of a union. For many of those years, she functioned as an officer of Local 795. This involved working with teachers and administrators, participating in district and state committees and meetings. For 20 years, she's been co-teaching a class at Cleveland Heights University Heights teachers, grades, kindergarten through high school, addressing behavioral issues and management in the classroom. She cherishes her gift to be able to participate in lively discussions and activities with those committed educators, some of whom are here, some of which are in Zoom, we hope, and some of them will be watching down the road. She retired after 11 years. It passed. She missed the students and staff, and then she heard about the Maltz Museum and their call. She is currently a docent and an officer of the Friends Committee, which supports the work of all the volunteers at the museum. Since 2014, she has found friends, knowledge, and commitment and challenge. Working with students and adults, she says, is rewarding. The content of the tours she provides requires honesty and the ability to really listen to the thoughts and feelings of guests. Interesting fact, for 25 years, she shared an adventure she would never have dreamed of. She traveled around the United States and Europe as the co-director of a fine arts program. She studied, I hope I'm pronouncing right, Tai Chi, okay, with Chinese philosophy and ink calligraphy. It was an amazing experience. Today, thing for all of us, I think, move at a slightly slower rate, but she continues to enjoy theater, music, reading, adventures, and celebrating just everything with her granddaughter, family, and friends. Let's both welcome Adrienne Yelsky and Mary Ann.
Wow.
It is you, don't worry.
Yeah, right. You sure? That was a really interesting person. Like, was that me? Anyway, it reminded me of something many, many years ago when I was teaching at Cleveland Heights High School. They decided, I don't know if they had a government grant or something, that they decided that we needed to have some workshops on how to deal with each other and our differences. And they actually got, I don't know if you remember that, if you were at Heights at that point or not, but they got subs for us. And for those of you who are teachers or who are teachers listening to this, you know that that's a big deal. But they actually got subs for us 3 different half days or something. And we did these workshops together and discussed some very heavy duty kind of things. And part of that was talking about our backgrounds and the things that we go through or we've gone through in our lives. And I will never forget, and that the reason I thought about this now is because listening to Mary Ann's story and my story, but we ended up the same place and we ended up being BFFs practically and spending tons of time together and understanding each other. But what this one fellow said, he was a phys ed teacher and swim coach. And maybe at the second session already or something, he says, I feel terrible. And we were like, why do you feel terrible? I mean, we didn't want to say, is it because nobody really likes you? But that was not that to do with it. But he said, I'm a white Protestant man. And he says, nothing's ever happened to me. I mean, there might have been some divorces in my family or illnesses here and there. But he says, listening to all these other things, it's like, how do you people keep going? You know, how do you come to work every day? And so when I listen to, you know, what Marty has just said, I guess that I sent this in, that I went from this country to this country to this country. And I'm thinking, whoa, are we different? But isn't it amazing that with everything that we've gone through and all the differences between us, that we have found certain commonalities, almost every commonality. And I'm working really hard to get her a bat mitzvah at least, or something to get her converted, so that we can have this, you know, the whole thing come to fruition.
And I thought I might drag her to my Catholic church. See how she likes that.
No, we do it very well together. Go for it. I mean, we didn't prepare anything here, so we're just gonna
We
talk.
actually laughed when we were with another girlfriend for lunch the other day, and we got out those things that Marty just read, and we exchanged them, and we just laughed. We said, "Whoa, how did we get here? We are so different. We really are very different." But and that's the part, as we were talking, in addition to that, that I love about this museum, is that it is so different to be there. And yes, people have said to me, "You're not Jewish, why are you there?" I said, "Well, my name works, doesn't it? Mary and Ann." It's our old Jewish names, right? So they sometimes wonder why I'm there, but I'm there because of the differences. The differences are what inspire me and fulfill me, really. The other part that I have shared with Adrienne is that she and I worked together at the high school. She was the Holocaust teacher, and then I was the guidance counselor. We didn't know each other so well then, but I had worked a lot with this Holocaust class through 3 different teachers, not just Adrienne. But I really valued that class. I valued what it did for the kids. So I was constantly scheduling kids for the class. That was part of my job. I had the influence on kids of what class to be part of. And I always encouraged them to be part of the Holocaust class. Sometimes ones that were a little tough to deal with, but I knew she could handle it. And she did, always. The part I loved about the way Adrienne taught is she always taught about and never skipped over the emotions. And of course, in the Holocaust, that is what we have, is many, many emotions, as we do today with what's going on in the world today. There are so many emotions about it. And I think that bringing students to the museum is about awakening these emotions and really helping them understand what they can turn into. And today's topic being hate, obviously, is something that these emotions can turn to. Is hate and then the violence. So I see it as a natural progression of our work to enlighten our visitors, whether they be students or adults, to what happens in the world sometimes in terms of emotions, and therefore what happens with us. And I am not Jewish, but it doesn't make any difference because what? And there are other people at the museum that are not Jewish, but it's the same. We are people. We all have emotions, and we all struggle with dealing with what those emotions are.
So I talked about when when some of you came to Cleveland, I usually, when I talk to students, and I try to stick pretty much to high school tours. That's what I taught. That's what I'm most comfortable with, much more so than with adults or with little ones. And I usually will sit in the auditorium, you know, even though the museum says, well, you should be taking them around and showing them the artifacts and this and that. Well, hello, you're at a Holocaust museum or a Jewish history museum, etc. This is not, my story is a very important part of that. And so I usually take them into the auditorium and I start telling them my story. Not so much about where I was born and all this moving around, but the fact was that I was a history teacher at Cleveland Heights High School. My dream job. Is my daughter out of her freaking mind? I told her this for 2 weeks already.
So much for technology.
I turn off the phone, but it's hard to turn off your wrist, I guess. I know there's a way of doing it. I'm not there yet. Anyway, when I was teaching American history and government, and loving every minute of it, and we went to this system called small schools, which was not the best idea that Bill and Melinda Gates ever had, but they gave us a whole lot of money to try it out. And we had a lead teacher in our small school. That's how Mary Ann and I became close, is that she was the counselor in this small school. And I got a phone call in the middle of a class from the lead teacher saying, do you want to teach the lessons of the Holocaust class? And I said, no. And he said, okay, then we're going to drop the class. And I went like, whoa, wait a minute. You can't drop the class. That's been around for 30 some years. I mean, this class was designed by Dr. Leah Stravinsky, who was the ultimate maven of knowing about the Holocaust. And she wasn't even a survivor, and she wrote the
Statewide curriculum.
the whole Ohio curriculum that she presented to the state of Ohio, which they accepted. It's like a 6-week curriculum designed to be taught in school systems where the kids may never have been exposed to a Jewish person or the Holocaust or anything like that. And so when she retired, we moved that class, which was known as Literature of the Holocaust, that my own daughter took. She was a tough teacher, English teacher. We moved it to the Social Studies department and renamed it Lessons of the Holocaust rather than Literature. And so there was a teacher in between. He was retiring. Now they're asking me. So kids will usually, you know, I'll say to the high schoolers as I talk to them in the auditorium, why do you think I would say no? And they usually would come up with, well, it's a painful subject. They get upset, you know, people don't want to talk about it, whatever. And then they, you know, adults would usually guess it immediately. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. I grew up with this. And yet I know very little about my own personal story. And in adulthood, I've come to realize, I've questioned myself so many times, why didn't I ask my mother this? Why didn't I talk to my father about this? Because I don't know, there's like all these gaps that I don't know. And I think in adulthood, I realized that maybe the reason is because I knew what hurt them. If they didn't choose to talk about it, because they didn't, especially my mother. Once I was past 6 years old, 5 years old, I never, ever heard her talk about the Holocaust. Before that, yes, nighttime, bedtime, she had a need to be talking about it to me because she couldn't talk about it to anybody else. I mean, I used to hear Mengele stories. Those of you that might know about the infamous Dr. Mengele, he's the one that separated her from her family, and I heard about the cattle car stories and things like that. But I think I just didn't, I think it would have been too painful for me to bring it up to them, so I didn't. So for me to be teaching about this every day in a classroom, I thought, I'll fall apart. What if I cry in front of 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds? But I couldn't let it go. I just could not let them stop the class. And so I took it on. In the first semester, I had one class of maybe 13, 14 kids just for one semester. We got so close. And you know what? I cried. And you know what else? They cried with me. And we got so close that I said to my husband, I said, I'm having the class over as soon as school's over, like right at the end of the school year. Well, then there
Over
was
to your house.
over to my house for dinner. Of course, it was pointed out to me, and I printed out like sheets, invitations, and gave it to them. And then there was like a little buzz in the room, sort of like, I mean, they really liked me, so they didn't want to hurt my feelings. But then somebody very brave, who I believe is now, she's a gynecologist at University Hospital.
Yeah.
She said to me,
She is.
Mrs. Yelsky, did you really mean to invite us to a Holocaust cookout? No, I think I called it a Holocaust barbecue. Okay, I really didn't mean to, you know, I mean, I never thought about it. So that's why I didn't want to teach it. It turned out that I taught it for about 8 years, something like that, 7 or 8 years before I retired. By the time I retired, now you're talking about going from Leah Stravinsky's days, when my daughter was a student there, where probably the school was minimum 50% Jewish, to me teaching it, where you're talking about
50% students and staff
being Jewish,
being Jewish.
to 10 years ago when we retired, 75% African American, perhaps. Maybe if we had, I don't know, I don't think we had 1% Jewish, probably. Maybe. Okay.
And many fewer staff.
Exactly. But by the time I retired, there were 100 students signed up for the Holocaust class every year. So I had 4 sections of it a year, 2 each semester. And it continues. It's now in the hands of a psychology teacher who's also an attorney who turned to teaching, and he has continued it. I mean, never as successfully as me, but still.
Not at all.
And he's getting ready to retire. And so, as Marty said, I have student teachers in the various high schools through John Carroll. So I was recently at Cleveland Heights High School, our old school. I have a student teacher there, and I was talking to the history teacher, the young man who's going to take over the Holocaust classes. And he says, I feel really uncomfortable about this. I almost feel like I need your blessing to take this on. He says, I have been sitting in Mark's classes during my free periods and watching what he's doing and everything. Do you think, you know, that I can do this because I'm not Jewish? And I said, that's not a problem. You don't have to be Jewish to teach about the Holocaust. He said, but there is one caveat. Okay, there is one stipulation I would make is, he said, okay, what's that? I said, you have to be circumcised. So,
Oh, yes. Yes.
we didn't discuss the, you know, like if there's going to be a test or anything like that, you know, but so it's in good hands. 50 years, we just celebrated 50 years of continuing Holocaust education at Cleveland Heights High School. And when I went to high school, to Cleveland Heights this week, and the security monitor says, well, you have to wait until somebody comes and escorts you to their classroom. And I taught here, I know, you know, obviously she is new. She said, well, no, those are the rules, which I really respect. But so a young monitor, you know, a security person comes down and escorts me. And I said, I'm sorry that you have to. He says, it's okay, Mrs. Yelsky. And I go, okay. And he says, I had you for lessons of the Holocaust class. I love that class. Next thing you know, we're hugging and everything, so the beauty of that is not to say that I was any kind of good teacher. The beauty of it is that I bump into kids who will say, oh yeah, I remember you, I had you for social studies. Okay. But I bump into kids who say, I had you for lessons of the Holocaust. Nobody says, oh, I had you for American history or government or world history, but I had you for lessons of the Holocaust. So obviously, when people say, why is this important? It really wasn't that important when my daughter took it. She knew about it. Her grandparents were Holocaust survivors. She knew all about it. But the kids today, they don't know about it. And so to have it in a school like Cleveland Heights or any of your schools, or to do essay contests about this, it's far more important than it's ever been. Far more important. And for me to tell Patrick Fisher that he is perfectly qualified to teach it is the same thing as Mary Ann Brennan being at the Maltz Museum, talking to students. It's a natural.
It works. Part of our very difference is I grew up in a very small town in Illinois. Father was a cattle broker. I don't know any cattle brokers here in Cleveland. I don't know if I would. But in my small town, which was about 6,000 people, there was a church on every corner. And we actually had a synagogue, temple, which was very unusual. I didn't know it at the time, but that meant, and of course, there was one school in the one, high school in the whole town. We all went to the same high school. So we all grew up in this very mixed community. I remember my parents being concerned they should send us to a Catholic high school. We weren't able to go to other Catholic schools. And my great aunt, who was a nun, says, oh no. She said, you cannot do that. You, as a parent, are the most important educator of your children, she told them. And there were 7 of us. We all went to the public high school. So I didn't really grow up with much exposure, no more to Jewish than I did to every other religion in the community. But they did do a very interesting thing. When I was a senior, apparently there was some problem with kids getting pregnant and some sexual issues. So the town got together and decided we should have, not out of the schools, but out of the community. So there were all kind of community people that came together. And we had these programs on Sunday, and they were in one of the different churches on one of the different corners every week. And that to me was amazing because we got in these churches and they actually had at the end of that a little religious ceremony, benediction or whatever, prayer. So it was for me another exposure to the experience of multiple religions. Even though they existed in this small town and we all knew each other that went to these places, we never gathered to pray, to be together to pray. And that was very powerful. And I feel that way when I'm at the museum, that not only is it an experience for me of knowing people, but it's also at some level an experience of praying. An experience of sharing something more intimate than we do otherwise. And that's been true with the 2 of us as well as other people at the museum. And there goes Esther. She knows about this museum and how it works.
That's right.
So it's, to me, a really important experience to talk about the kinds of experiences that people have, not only as part of the Jewish community, but also as part of other communities, and how we bring that together, how we incorporate that in our lives, and how we address, and today the issue is violence, how we address what comes forth. I mean, violence doesn't always come forth. Thank you. Actually, Esther just brought in a brochure and paper about our next exhibit at the museum. And I've been busy, we've been busy reading all about it. There's a lot to read about this. But actually, I was amazed how the things that I'm saying were actually printed as part of this new exhibit. It's called The Girl in the Diary. And it was a diary that was found after they were with Auschwitz. A doctor found it and put this diary away. The girl was 14 years old when she wrote it. She wrote it
In the Lodz Ghetto.
in the Lodz Ghetto from 1943 to 1944. And in that diary, she shares a lot of the emotions that are going on while in the Lodz Ghetto. Her parents have both died. Father from a beating, mother has died. Her two brothers were taken away, never saw them again. One of her sisters died, and she did have one other sister. But it's about the emotional journey, and the amazing part was this 14-year-old girl so clearly spoke about it in her diary. And of course, it brings forth those emotions, especially with what we're dealing with today. They do not know what happened to her. But the exhibit is part of the journey to try to find out what did happen to her. And it's very powerful. The whole thing is powerful. And this article tells a bit about it, but one of the things that we do enjoy about the museum is, in this case, we're doing a lot of reading, but the issues that are brought up through the different exhibits can be very powerful and very enlightening and bring forth emotions in all of us. And so as docents, we really value sharing that with one another before we even start working with the public, be they children or be they adults, because we do both children and adult tours. So again, and in some of those tours, Adrienne does mainly the high school tours, but I've worked with all the levels, as I did in my career. I worked with small children through high school. And it's not so easy to present some of these issues to the very young. But they know about it. How do they know about it? Know about it because the emotions that their adults are experiencing, they read it, they know it.
Social media also.
Oh yes, of course, social media and the kids talking at school and so forth. So we need not be afraid to talk to the children about it. We just need to address it at their level. And how do you do that? You listen to them. Really listen closely to what they need to hear. If they'll tell you, they'll tell you.
Right. My students, because it was a semester course, I always knew that if a kid came in and asked me a certain question, sort of challenging me the first few days that they were in my Holocaust class, that they had just finished taking the African American history class, which was also a semester. So oftentimes Mary Ann or other counselors would back them up, back to back. And so there would be had kids saying to me, well, which was worse, the Holocaust or slavery? Talk about, what do you say now? And pretty much I would say, well, you know, this is not the Olympics of suffering. It's not like we're going to hold up a card and say, oh, that was 9.6, but your suffering was only a 9.5, so we suffered more. Suffering is suffering, and oftentimes when we do our tours and we do these hate tours, which of course have to be, if we do a Holocaust tour, it's automatically a hate tour also. I love it when teachers say, I want a Holocaust tour, or I want a hate tour. You know, it's the same thing. I mean, hate, of course, we can bring a whole lot of other things into it, and it continues going on. But Holocaust, you can't do it without hate. So I would always, you know, say to the kids, any kind of suffering, I mean, it's a personal kind of thing. Yes, this is, I mean, you look at the news today, as a Jew, it becomes incredibly difficult as an American Jew, okay, for me to talk about this. It's like I'd rather keep my mouth shut because I'm angry. I'm full of hate myself because of all this, you know, babies and hostages and 260 kids that went to a music concert and everything being, you know, mowed down. But then I see the Palestinians and I know the history of being pushed around and that sort of thing. I mean, it's like there's two sides and there's hate on both sides. And how are we going to work this out? And so for kids, that's what we have to make them understand, is that there's two sides to everything, except for the educator who was sitting there with her Texas teachers, an administrator who said that in Texas, some kind of new law is that you have to present both sides of a story. So if you're talking about the horrors of the Holocaust, you have to present the other side. And the teachers were like, what other side can there be to the Holocaust? You know, what would be a good side of that? So there's no, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the good guys and the bad guys, or the good side and the bad side. It's that there's always, you always have to listen, as Mary Ann said. And one of the things I found, especially with kids that are, if you're teaching kids that are a little bit younger, meaning like 8th and 9th grade, I can't speak to younger than that. The graphic novels, Mouse, which by the way, I think is now banned in Florida. Might be Texas too. In Ohio, yet, thank goodness, we're safe. But the graphic novel Mouse is incredibly powerful. And actually, it can be used beautifully in conjunction with something called March, which is John Lewis's graphic novel. John Lewis, who marched with Martin Luther King and was in Congress all those years and just died a couple of years ago. And his whole story of being so badly beaten on the march, you know, Selma and all that kind of stuff, that to compare them and contrast them. And I didn't use that. I didn't use those. But when my granddaughter was in Beechwood in the school system, I helped her with that. And it was beautifully done about the two graphic novels. But that's definitely something that I think would be, whether you have children that age, you know, like 8th grade on, or even 7th grade on, or just as a teacher, you know, to think about that. I had the privilege because our Lessons of the Holocaust class was not a class that they were tested on, you know, state tested. So I had some freedom, thank you. And besides, I didn't give tests. They wrote, we saw films, we discussed, we had guest speakers, et cetera, et cetera. We still had Holocaust survivors alive enough to could speak to them. So I was able to take 3 days or 4 days and show them Schindler's List. Kids today don't even have any idea what Schindler's List is. And I'll talk to teachers and they say, oh yeah, we saw, I showed them Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That's about as real about the Holocaust as, okay, I don't even know what to compare it to. It's a fairy tale. It couldn't have happened. And to make kids think, just to make them feel better, I'm not sure that, you're better off not even showing anything like that. That's my opinion. Something is coming out soon for all you guys, as soon as maybe this actor strike is over, is there's going to be an actual Hollywood movie made about the life of Sir Nicholas Winton. And this is a man who was the most incredible human being during World War II. Nicholas Winton died 3 years ago, at maybe 105 or something. Sir Nicholas Winton arranged for children, hundreds of children, to be transported from Czechoslovakia to Great Britain and be temporarily adopted by British families. And there was no reason, he was a diplomat, he had no reason to do this, and he never told anyone that he did this, including his wife, until she was looking for something up in their attic one day and went through some old chests or something and saw names and he was a very, very good about keeping tabs on everything and the names of kids and who they went to and everything. And she questioned him about it. It's the first time, and he was already like 80 years old, that anyone had found out about this. So you talk about righteous people. Now it turns out he was Jewish, but he lived very,